Joy to introduce someone named Mel Tidwell, who was born in Lakeland, Florida. Mel lived on a small family farm. He was a dedicated musician throughout his school years. He joined the Navy at age 18. After submarine training in Groton, Connecticut, Mel was stationed on a submarine in Hawaii. After 10 years in the Navy, Mel left the Navy and started working for Lockheed Martin. Mel traveled the world as an engineer, working on Navy ships in the U.S. and abroad. He left Lockheed in 1996. In 97, he worked as a boiler technician at Yellowstone National Park. After driving across the U.S. a few times, Mel took a job with Gulfstream Aerospace in Savannah. He eventually returned to Lockheed in Huntsville, Alabama in 2003. And there he met his now spouse, John Pruitt, who is our pianist and music director. Mel retired from Lockheed in 2017 and moved with John to their home in Blue Ridge. Mel now spends his time cooking and gardening and cleaning and taking care of John and their two super hunting Norwegian elk hounds, Rags and Bo, the two protectors of the gardens and all around scoundrels. The title of Mel's talk today is Free Speech Shouldn't Be Free. Mel. Stuff out of here.
Thank you, Gail. Good morning, everyone. I'm back again. In the age we are living, it's hard to accept the concept of free speech. I do believe it is necessary for a society to survive. I also believe in consequences for what you say, right? I think of the Seinfeld episode about the car reservations. The one where he goes to pick up his rental car and they don't have one available. So he says that you know how to take the reservations, but you don't know how to hold the reservations, and that's the most important part. So you see, have free speech. But where are the consequences? The consequences are the most important part. So yes, you should be able to say, I'm going to grab her by the, because I also believe there should be consequences behind it. This shouldn't be rewarded with wealth, fame, or positions of power. It shouldn't be passed off as just boys will be boys. We as citizens of good conscience should not allow women to be treated like chattel and should rousingly voice that to all. We as a free society should support all who are in it, not only the ones that are like us and have the same ideas. It seems we are currently living in a time when those consequences of societal norms are eroding. You see, I remember the taste of Ivory soap pretty well. I got so used to it that back in my 20s, as a sailor living in Hawaii, I used it to brighten my teeth. But now I am seeing an ugliness emerging that I had hoped was from days past. However, many times it's now veiled in political speech or religious doctrine. Of course, when it's spoken in these contexts, it loses the brevity of its impact. People become desensitized to it. Many come to think it is their religious or civic duty to spread their messages of disdain for others or even conduct violent acts in the name of Jesus or country. I had hoped that after the AIDS crisis of the 1980s and how the gay community and our allies banded together and raised our voices, that we had segregated these messages to the nether regions of our society. I also believe that after the 1970s, women had achieved the rights to self-govern their own bodies and seek the health care they needed, as well as standing against the misogyny of our male-dominated society. Well, it seems, as with all things, that unless we continue to raise our voices, the beast is rising again. Even bigger now with the prevalence of social media and 24-hour news. With the rise of megachurches able to broadcast to millions and politicians wanting to be social media stars, influencers, and TikTokers instead of leaders for all, these ideas of the past are raising their heads again. After the Pulse nightclub massacre in Florida in 2016, a preacher named Roger Jimenez preached these words from his pulpit. The tragedy is that more of them didn't die. The tragedy is I'm kind of upset that he didn't finish the job because these people are predators. They are abusers. And people agreed with him. In a sermon at a church in Fort Worth, Texas, Pastor Donnie Romero told his congregants that every gay person is a pedophile. He prayed that the victims would not survive so that they don't get any more opportunity to go out and hurt little children. And people agreed with him. Then there's the, in my view, weirdly hypocritical pro-life movement and their narrative. A female CNN contributor said of the Virginia mandatory ultrasound bill of 2012, which, by the way, would require women to undergo an invasive, medically unnecessary procedure before getting an abortion. She said that they had no problem having something similar to this procedure when they engaged in the act that resulted in the pregnancy. Luckily, in this instance, the measure was never adopted, but many agreed with her. Let us not forget Alex Jones. His litany of terror set upon the parents of children killed in the Sandy Hook shooting. His free speech led to the terrorizing of families over whether their children were actually murdered. He openly accused them of being crisis actors. His listeners, I guess I should call them followers, stalked these parents. They threatened their lives and forced them to relive the brutality of what happened to their family time and again. Hopefully, it seems at least he will be held accountable monetarily. But many agree with him. I cannot help but be frightened by all of this when we witness a convoy of trucks driving in circles around our town of Blue Ridge flying giant Confederate flags. Several of them wielding weapons and displaying the KKK banner. It breaks my heart to see people pointing weapons at the high schoolers in Gilmer County legally standing in the LJ Town Square to voice their opinions of support for the Black Lives Matter movement. I cannot turn a blind eye to the hundreds who march through the streets of Charlottesville, Virginia, chanting, "The Jews will not replace us." You see, many people agree with them. So where does this take me? It's led me to ask the question, should free speech be free? The First Amendment guarantees our right to free expression and free association, which means that the government does not have the right to forbid us from saying what we like and writing what we like. We can form clubs and organizations and take part in demonstrations and rallies. But many people have this duality with their ideas of free speech and the First Amendment. It doesn't guarantee you the right to say whatever you want without consequence. It restricts what the government may do to restrain your speech and nothing else. It doesn't mean you have the right to blast whatever you want on your Twitter feed. It doesn't mean you have the right to scream into a camera calling women skanks on your podcast. It doesn't mean you have the right to lie about an election. We all know that people in the spotlight tell lies, especially when it comes to public figures. Unfortunately, we have lost sight of the restrictions our society has normally put on their speech. I'm not talking about curse words, I'm talking about damaging words. Words that harm our nation. Words that so harm our sensibilities that we would restrict them with societal consequences. We would condemn them. We would not vote for them. We would not go see their movies or buy their products. In today's time, if we attempt to apply the soap-to-mouth restrictions, another billionaire creates a social media platform where we tell each other our lies are the truth. We name it Truth Social, Tribal, Gab, Parler, or whatever. Then we attract people that believe the lies just because they want to, not because it's really the truth. It's well documented that these platforms allow hate speech. You can create content that is an outright lie without consequence. The users are allowed to post anti-Semitic rants and blame Jews for all the world's troubles. You can use them to spread ideas that gays are degenerate pedophiles. You can create scenarios out of thin air. The owners of these platforms will allow just about anything, and users can gather absolutely ridiculous and unfounded conspiracy theories and spread them as truth. There, they can descend into a place of slapping each other on the back like good old boys. The Supreme Court decision in Tinker versus Des Moines Independent Community School District held that students in public schools, which are run by the government, do not leave their First Amendment rights at the schoolhouse gate. In a 7-2 decision, the Supreme Court's majority ruled that neither students nor teachers shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate. So, the way to get around what many conservatives espouse as liberal indoctrination in public schools was to lead a seemingly inconspicuous campaign to malign them. I remember the radio host Rush Limbaugh constantly referring to public schools as screwels, meaning those liberal teachers were indoctrinating children to hate America. He is quoted time and again lambasting the public school system as indoctrinators and teachers of American hatred. He regularly espoused views that diversity and multiculturalism were leading to the decline of our country. He was a leader in the campaign to divert funds from our public schools to private institutions, while also condemning these same schools for being dilapidated and run down. He isn't the only one. His cries of liberty and freedom were wrapped in the flag and were presented to listeners as being uplifting. He spoke of this in a way to make people believe that to teach our history was to hate our country. To teach and accept diversity was akin to hating America. Isn't it ironic how this was presented? Saying that teaching our true history meant you hated America? Isn't it sort of Kafkaesque to say teachers hate America while blatantly saying you hate them and the public education system? It seems that our Unitarian ideology of kindness and acceptance of all has just become more fodder for people that want to sideline those they either don't understand or believe should have no voice. The ones that should be sidelined as if it were 1930, back in a time when the minorities weren't guaranteed the protections afforded the mainstream citizens of America. We as a nation should stand and speak loudly and clearly that this is not the direction we want our country to take. In our American history, we opened our borders to almost everyone. More than 12 million people were welcomed to our shores through Ellis Island. We as a nation have created a society of many into one, and our citizens of every shade, origin, and path should be equally represented. The Oxford Dictionary defines democracy as a system of government by the whole population or all the eligible members of a state, typically through elected representatives. Our democracy requires this to survive. This is the free speech our countrymen need. The supportive voices to uplift the peoples fleeing wars and conflicts and famine, not the ones chastising them and transporting them around the country for political gain as if cattle. A personal hero of mine is Harvey Milk. He was the first openly gay person elected to office. He gave a speech titled the Hope Speech prior to his assassination. He said, "The myths against Blacks can only be dispelled by electing Black leaders so the Black community could be judged by its leaders and not by the myths or Black criminals. The Spanish community must not be judged by Latin criminals or myths. The Asian community must not be judged by Asian criminals or myths. The Italian community must not be judged by the mafia myths." He said, "For invisible, we remain in limbo." A myth. A year or so ago, I was at a neighbor's home sharing a glass of wine and chatting. She asked me some deeply personal questions about supporting the police, race, and politics. I know that sounds anathema to a good time, but as I've spoken about before, people need to have that aha moment where the light bulb illuminates over their head. Instead of holding my tongue, I chose to speak freely. I chose to speak kindly instead of arguing. I spoke from my heart in the place of hoping my point would enlighten her. Specifically, she was involved in a situation at work where, in her opinion, a Black person had been promoted before someone, possibly her, I didn't ask, more qualified. She really wanted me to agree that it was unfair for race to be a factor in the decision. I did not agree. I voiced the ideals that businesses should be able to run the business however they choose. Isn't that what the cake bakers and private religious hospitals have argued in court and in many cases been successful? I explained that perhaps that business has many people of other backgrounds and they want them to feel welcome and equally represented when they walk through the door. I mean, sure, it would seem that you would want the most experienced person if that was your only goal. However, in our modern multicultural society, perhaps the person of color was technically qualified for the position and they would represent a targeted customer base that would help them achieve their future financial goals. I'm unsure if I changed her mind, but it did put her on the back foot when I used her own political philosophy to support my point of view. It was a calm and rational discussion. We each heard the other. You see, we need to stop looking at life through the pages of the Bible, lens of a political microscope, or horse blinders in every situation. Don't get me wrong, politics affects every aspect of our lives, but we have to see us as we are. Flawed, political, loving, and caring. We must stop the ideology of needing to revamp our country to make it great again while screaming America is the greatest country on earth, which to me makes zero sense. I remember during my friend Dee Stennett's homily on kindness jotting down that we should build kindness into our free speech. We would all be better suited to lead every thought we generate and place into the world with kindness. Not to say we agree with all ideas from every person or political ideology or religion. But how about instead of saying you're a freaking idiot for believing all gays are evil, we speak that my best friend or neighbor is a gay person and I love them as they are. Speak from a place in your heart and not from your anger center. That is what I'm striving for. Discussion from my heart and not from a place of destruction of other ideas. Read the story of Richard McKinney and the Muncie Islamic Center. He was there to find the best position for placing a bomb that would kill the most Muslims. But due to the kindness and love he received at that mosque, he now believes they saved his life. Author Magnus Binding says that two loose currents appear to be in opposition in today's culture. One is animated by a strong insistence on empathy and compassion as core values. The other by a strong insistence on free speech as a core value. These two currents are often portrayed as though they must necessarily be in conflict. It is crucial to distinguish one, social and ethical norms, and two, state-enforced laws. The argument I make here pertains to the first level. That is, I am arguing that we should aim to observe and promote ethical norms of compassion and open conversation, respectively. There are lots of strong arguments in favor of free speech. A famous collection of such arguments is On Liberty, written in 1859 by John Stuart Mill, an English philosopher and author of the early feminist work, The Subjection of Women. He wrote, "The peculiar evil of silencing the expression of an opinion is that it is robbing the human race. Posterity, as well as the existing generation, those who dissent from the opinion still more than those who hold it. If the opinion is right, they are deprived of the opportunity of exchanging error for truth. If wrong, they lose what is almost as great a benefit, the clearer perception and livelier impression of truth produced by its collision with error." In essence, Mill argues that contrary to the annoyance we may instinctively feel, we should in fact be grateful for having our cherished views challenged, not least because it can help clarify and update our views. Today, Mill's argument can be further bolstered by a host of well-documented psychological biases. We now know that we are all vulnerable to confirmation bias, the bandwagon effect, groupthink, the list goes on. I found myself succumbing to this many times. These biases make it all too easy for us to deceive ourselves into thinking that we already possess the whole truth, although we most certainly do not. Consequently, if we want to hold reasonable beliefs, we should welcome and appreciate those who challenge the pitfalls of our groupish minds, pitfalls that we may otherwise be content to embrace in what I would argue is ultimately indulgent self-betrayal. After all, how can we know that our attempts to protect ourselves from hearing views we dislike are not essentially unconscious attempts to protect our own confirmation bias? Free and open conversation is our best debiasing tool. Our manifest fallibility renders free speech essential. Recognition that incitement, false advertisement, and a variety of other categories can be restrained in a civil society without violating the Constitution is a testament to Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes' assertion that the First Amendment cannot have been, and obviously was not, intended to give immunity for every possible use of language. As Robert Post puts it, the values served by the First Amendment, not simply syntax and semantics, come into play in free speech analysis. So no, I don't think free speech should be free. I believe that a good and just society should individually and collectively restrain free speech. We should hold each other accountable for what we say. The ethics of compassion and kindness should lead our discussions. We cannot use hate to combat hate. I'm consciously trying from this day forward to use the compassionate voices in my head. I hope to lead a path back to discussion instead of shame throwing, which I believe is the verbal equivalent of flame throwing. I want to be an example of what we can be if we lead with our ethics taught to us as children. Not the verbal onslaught we're hearing daily now, as if it were a misogynistic all-male Navy ship from the 1980s. I'm trying to not avoid discussing our differences, but approach them in a more ethical-minded response. It should be, as I was reminded over and over when I was a child. I can still hear my mother's voice saying, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. Thank you.